A Viking Melodious. In this realm, unlike the confines of our world, Vikings are the people of the nether realms, comprised of three small warring factions, and much like within our world, they war amongst each other, furiously, ferociously, and have so for millennia. Little has changed, in fact, in the last 1,000 years, save for one individual. His name, well, it is to be told, but he is a great warrior, a great man, or was foretold to be, and that is what he is to become, and all the rest of them to watch as he fulfills this fate, and to exalt and glorify him for his fortitude and the great deeds that he will surely and truly commit himself to. Part 1. The fairest of the Viking shield maidens was not fairer than the fairest of the Viking slave women. Torstar knew this. He had eyes, after all, and so did she. Deep brown, her complexion light, but slightly more tan than the complexion of her betters, if you could call them that. Torstar, as the Lord's brother's son, did doubt it, and because he was a strong man with lengthy composure, yet muscled and strong. He had long blonde hair which fell down past his shoulders, and as he stared at her, the slave girl, the name of whom he yet knew, he noted the hair which they had cut short, and the look of solemn despair on the woman's face. Beautiful as she was, she looked so tired. Torstar could hardly stand to look at her any further. The pain of it, for whatever reason, was unbearable. He was young, of course. The Lord would insist that he was acting too rashly, that she was but a slave woman, that he could take her any time that he wanted to, but Torstar did not wish to harm the woman, and he did not wish to own her, though he would likely have to if he were to free her of her confines, something that was not entirely unheard of, but which was rightly frowned upon within the community. It did occur. On occasion, a slave woman would be set free of her bonds of servitude, as it were, and even sometimes a slave man, though usually it was that they died much too early on to be freed. The ones who made it far enough in their servitude, they were given sword and shield, taught to fight, and then joined the ranks of the Viking. They were second-rate, of course, Torstar knew, but they had their uses. He had yet to see even a proper Viking who could best his father, however, or his father's brother, his uncle, the Lord, who was the best of the fighters in their small province of Uberland, and most certainly the greatest in the village by far. Some of the best warriors in these lands did live there in Rolskar, that small village that Torstar could call home, though perhaps in that moment, because of the slave girl, a slave woman, of course he might have hesitated. His compassion his father had always claimed was perhaps ill-advised, but Torstar doubted him. He did not think his father to be weak, but he did doubt his prowess by comparison to his uncle, and his uncle by comparison to himself, though he would never speak openly about such a claim, let alone admit what he thought of the two. He loved them, of course, but he was a better fighter, he knew it. They refused to fight him, and in the past when they had won only because Torstar had decided to allow them. Truly, he was that sword-skilled. Yet, despite his sword skill, the differences in fighting skill was not entirely obvious to perhaps a bystander who might be watching from afar, or perhaps up close. In fact, he was better, but only by margins, and at the highest level of competition in this village, and in this small village, and in the rest of the lands, as far as any one individual was concerned, that minutiae was a key difference that made all of the difference. Torstar, he knew, was the best fighter in the land, and many others knew it, but no one said anything, of course, for fear of conflict within the Warder family. That was Torstar's family name, Warder, and a proud family it was indeed. Perhaps then his uncle and his father knew something of the world which he did not, he sometimes thought. What that was, he was uncertain. Without shying away from the slave girl, as he felt no fear in approaching her, he did approach her, and he took her hand and whispered, "You must not like to be a slave." This, of course, frightened her greatly, but she did not try to run. He wondered if he should have gone about the situation in a better way. But like the fables and the stories which his grandfather, the great Rolp, had told him in the great hall of the village, the hall Ur, or the Ur hall, however any villager of the town preferred it. Normally the peasants said hall Ur, and the Lord simply called it Ur hall. It was simpler. Like those fables, he approached the slave girl with such a zest and zeal that he might replicate them, as they were of such romance, with such vigor, that surely this poor slave girl would have to come to love him. And she did, and Torstar's father, whose name was Lofer, loathed him for it. He even went so far as to claim days later that it was something short of a tragedy that his son of all men might fall for such a woman, and declared that he must cease speaking with her immediately. His uncle, Lord Relic, did tend to agree. Torstar, of course, followed his father's instructions, at least whilst in his father's presence. At any other time, while he was chasing after his beloved, of course, the poor slave girl with the short brown hair, who undoubtedly needed him more than he did her. Still, if you were to watch as they spoke with one another, despite their respective positions, it was quite clear that they were both deeply infatuated with one another, perhaps even in love. It was hard to say, but one thing was for certain: Torstar, he was not going to stop speaking with this girl. Her name was Loila, and it was true, her name was quite foreign to Torstar's ears, but it was also true that he could not have cared less. In fact, he enjoyed the difference between she and himself. It made their bond even ever the stronger, and of course Torstar did relish the time that they had together, as did she, the young lady, Loila, who eventually was no longer a slave girl. After months, Torstar, who'd finally begun to speak of Loila, despite his father's wishes, convinced his father to buy her, and from there she worked her way into freedom, which, given Lofer's position within the village, did not take long, as his son, the soon-to-be great Torstar, was perhaps soon to be next in line behind his uncle in place of Lord Relic, who was, despite, or rather in favor of his name, a relic of the time, or it was said to be so. Torstar was not sure that he agreed, but the people who noticed his size, his strength and ability, and his fairness in his treatment of this slave girl must have figured that he would be a better fit for the ruler than his uncle, who was by any measure a harsh man. That, of course, was to say the least, as it was not uncommon for Lord Relic to take lands of the hands of thieves and to execute those who did not follow his instructions when raiding in the other nether realms, of which theirs was one and the others were two. Torstar did not care. He did not want to rule anything, admittedly, something that his father despised in him. For the poor loafer did want everything for himself, for his family, and should he have his way, he would have left none for anyone else. Surely, lest he had to, he wanted to possess so badly, so harshly, so desperately. Interestingly enough, he grew fond of the slave girl, however, who cooked and cleaned and did all the chores that a wife ought do, though she was not Torstar's wife yet, of course. One day he would ask Lofer if he could marry her, probably. He often joked that he might not with her. But of course he would marry her, of course. He loved her too much not to. His infatuation was so deep. It was a shame to say that hers, however deep, was not as deep as his was, for whatever reason. Maybe it was because of Torstar's naivety that he would fall in love with such a woman, that he would not realize that the primary reason that she loved him was for his. Surely, though Torstar could not foresee it, his beloved would break him in two and ravage his heart of its innocent state. Surely so, this would occur. For now, however, Torstar was happy, and so was Loila. The two of them together made for a better Rolskar, as many of the tasks of the village, the tax collections, or at least some of them and what not, were handed over to Torstar as his responsibility. Relic wanted to make sure of any reasonable thought that Torstar would remain loyal to him, and of course that did make sense to Torstar, and so, without ill intent, Torstar followed through with his duties and obligations to Relic steadfastly, that he may return home to his soon-to-be wife under these silent tasks. Lofer did as well, albeit begrudgingly, for he had no one to return to, and despite his whoring and drinking, he was quite alone in the world, save Torstar, as his mother had died giving birth to him, who was obviously preoccupied at the time. And by the time that night had fallen upon the village of Rolskar, a plan was unfolding, one dark, deep, and secret, or to be kept so, lest the worst occur. Torstar knew of the plan, and he told nobody, his father having told him what he intended to do to his uncle Relic, like the artifact that he was. Surely, Torstar thought, this was but a nightmare, but he knew it to be true. Lofer would kill Relic and take his rightful place as lord. Torstar had never imagined that such a thing could occur, or would occur, that his father would choose to fight and kill his uncle. But as the plans were already made and to be implemented in a short time, Torstar knew that he must challenge his uncle in his father's stead, lest his father die, for he was not better a fighter than Relic was, and would surely lose by any stretch of the imagination, and die. His father had given him short notice, and by the time the day had arrived for the deed to be dealt with and completed, Torstar was ready. He had trained for weeks now, and of course, when his father did challenge his uncle openly, and with great honor and pride, despite the dishonor and the killing of a family member, Torstar did step forward and say, "Uncle." "Nephew," Relic replied. "I am sorry," Torstar said. Relic, taller than most men, with long dark brown hair, and a jagged scar that ran down the side of his face, smirked a moment, and then returning to seriousness said, "So am I."